So get this. My rich husband, well, I should say his aunt, because my husband doesn't have a dollar to his name, it's all his aunt's. Well, she decides, hey, we'll go ahead and cover your wedding expense. You just have to do one thing I say, and that's I get to pick the stuff at the wedding. Not you. I know it's your wedding, but hear me out. I will be responsible for the dress, the food, the cake, the dance, the venue, you name it, and oh, I promise, I won't be a bridezilla.
I used to believe that family members were meant to be backbones and support systems who could help another without T's and C's or any kind of strings attached. But after everything that happened during my wedding preparation, my husband and I stopped thinking that way. The first time I met Walter was during my college days. He was my colleague in college, and funnily enough, we did not used to talk to each other that much. It was just random hellos, and that was it. But one Monday morning, while I was trying to hurry to work, we bumped into each other, while he was also trying to get to his office, and that's how our friendship started. Walter used to be one of the guys I used to crush on right from my freshman year in college. But because I did not want to get distracted in school at the time, I avoided him completely and focused on my studies. I'll be honest, studying was not the only reason I avoided him. It's because he used to have a lot of girls around him, and even back in the dorm I lived in, his name had a way of crawling out of almost every girl's mouth. I think this had more to do with his good looks and cheerful nature, which attracted a lot of people to him, including me. So when we bumped into each other on that day, I believed it was the stars aligning in order for my good. We weren't so close back in college, so our conversation was kind of weird, especially with the fact that we had not seen each other in years. The only thing I'm certain of was the butterflies that scattered inside of my tummy. The moment our eyes met. And after the first day, we started seeing ourselves more often, because he worked in a building that was only 2 houses where I lived. Not to get ahead of myself, but I did believe there was a chance for Walter and I to become a thing. I was not wrong. When I was younger, my ideal man was the kind of man who would be good-looking, cheerful, hard-working, and very supportive. I'd seen the way my father supported my mother and every single thing that she did or wanted to do. And I wished I could find a man like him, and Walter happened to fit the bill perfectly. It wasn't just Walter's, good looks that attracted me to him. It was his kindness and supportive nature. Back in school, Walter was kind to a fault. One time, he missed a very important test because his roommate had food poisoning, and since his roommate finally lived in a state far away from where we schooled, Walter had to stay with him at the hospital for the whole day. That wasn't all. He was also very intelligent, dedicated, and full of dreams. I just admired that about him. With us constantly seeing each other almost every day, it did not take long for us to become close friends. It all started with Walter borrowing one of my Stephen King books, and from there he would just drop by my house for coffee, most of the evenings before heading back home. And whenever he dropped by, we would talk about random stuff. Our experiences in college, what we wanted out of life, work, dream, goals, and our future. In fact, we talked about everything that the people who were getting to know each other talked about. Surprisingly, Walter and I happened to have similar passions and interests. We wanted to meet the same world-renowned experts in our field, visit the same places and countries, and even share the same birth month. Career-wise, I always wanted to have my own clothing since I was a child, and I was passionate about fashion design. Walter, too, also wanted to have his children and swimwear clothing. And as of the time we met, he was already talking to somebody that could help him. To me, it was a sign from the universe, especially since we both wanted the same things and we had similar ideas, shared the dreams of having our clothesline one day. With time, we got to know each other better, and getting to know Walter was an amazing discovery process for me. Every day we got close and our bond grew stronger, until I began to fall in love with him. I loved everything about him and the way he treated me, but I was just afraid to voice out my feelings, so he would not take advantage of the way I felt towards him. It did not take long before Walter confessed the way he felt about me. And then, well, he asked me to be his girlfriend. I could not say no. So almost 4 months after seeing each other, we started to date. Walter was sweet, caring, and loyal, smart. Had a head full of ideas, and I wanted to spend the rest of my life with this man. With every passing day, our relationship got more serious, and in less than a year's time, well, he asked to marry me. When he did, I was very surprised because I was not expecting him to act so fast, especially with the fact that we were not financially ready to fund a wedding. See, we both came from South America, where weddings were considered a very big deal. And to add to that, we both come from modest backgrounds, and it was almost impossible for us to, well, or for our families to fund a wedding at that time. I said yes to him, but we did not start planning the wedding right away. We agreed that we would work and save for at least 6 months, so we could have enough just to do a small, happy wedding. As a girl, I used to dream of having those big, beautiful Hollywood standard weddings. You know, well, I know Walter wanted one too, because I'd seen him stalking a popular wedding blog and website, but it was quite unfortunate that we could not afford that kind of wedding at that stage of our life. Also, we did not want to get a loan to fund a big wedding. It would have been a crazy thing to do. One of my friends, Anna, suggested borrowing money from a friend of ours to fund the wedding, but I shot against the idea. We were only beginning our lives as a couple, and I didn't want us to start with a huge amount of debt on our racks. During that 6 months period, Walter and I cut down on a lot of things. We canceled the trip we were supposed to go on before we got engaged, and I no longer shopped as I used to. And we saved as much as we could. In fact, he had to move in with me so he could save his portion of the rent that he paid and split with me. But despite saving all of that, we got the 5th month, and it was still not up that we needed for our small wedding. Well, when we talked about it, we decided to give ourselves an additional 4-month extension before the wedding so we could save some more money. Since we were not in a hurry to get married, all along while Walter and I dated and planned our marriage, there was one of Walter's aunts that I never met. Walter used to mention her sometimes, but he never took me to see her. She wasn't really his favorite aunt. She was just one of those family members that Walter pretended to like because she was a pain in the butt. She'd complain about almost everything that Walter did, and what he wore, how he looked, how he combined his clothing, and so much stuff. I'd met most of his family members just as he had met mine, but I never met his Aunt Grace. Then, one day, out of the blue, Walter said we're going to meet Grace because, well, she had been asking to see his fiancé, and I said it's fine. That same weekend, we went on to Grace's house, and that's when I found out that she was extremely wealthy. I'm saying, like, wealthy. She was married to a rich man, who passed away and left all of his property, business, and everything to her and her daughter. Fancy. We got to meet Grace, and within the first few minutes of being there, I understood exactly why Walter did not want to introduce me to her like he was supposed to. After just introducing myself and telling her what I did for a living, Grace managed to identify that I was wearing a knockoff Versace silk skirt. And she talked about how my white Chanel bag was a knockoff too, and the worst of its kind. At the same time, she called her daughter Fiancee on the phone and asked her to bring the last Chanel bag she bought so she could prove a point to me. When Fiancee came out with this said Chanel bag, I discovered that she was extremely fat. The kind of fat that would require you to, well, have your own dresses made by a designer, and from how unexcited she looked when she saw us, I could tell that, well, she did not go out of a lot or have many friends. Fiancee brought the bag and barely smiled at her cousin, Walter, She acted like she had not seen me and went back inside her room. I didn't feel bad, but it felt awkward because I kept smiling at her, but she completely ignored me. See, Grace, on the other hand, just kept making my ears bleed with all her stories, and she talked about how she loved to buy gadgets, clothes, and shoes on the day of their release. So she would not end up buying knockoffs because her quote knockoffs were meant for lowlives. After being so embarrassed, I sent Walter a text, telling him that, hey, I want to go. But he held onto my hand and he asked us to stay, just as I was struggling within me to not go yet. Grace asked about our wedding and our plans, and she said that she's been expecting us to come with the wedding invitation since Walter initially told her that we'd be getting married in 6 months. And the deadline for our first agreed 6 months was only a month away. Walter explained to her that we were trying to save a bit more money, and the wedding would, well, not hold until the next 5 months, and she laughed. She thought Walter was pulling her leg, but when she did not get any response from him, she stopped laughing. See, she went ahead to say that it was bad luck to plan a wedding for that long, and told us how her late husband married her just a month after he proposed. Grace just had a way of bringing herself into every conversation, or making things simply revolve around her. When she asked us about the kind of wedding that we were planning, that took us 10 months to do, Walter told her it's just going to be a small wedding, 30 people, and she burst into laughter. I'm talking about an excruciating loud laugh. I didn't know Fiancee had been eavesdropping on our conversation because she laughed so hard in the other room when her mother laughed. Immediately, Grace heard Fiancee's laughter and she asked her to not be rude to her cousin, so Fiancee came out of the room. At that point, I was already losing my temper, but Walter helped me to remain calm. When Grace stopped laughing at us, she asked Walter, well, to tell her the kind of wedding he would have done if money was not a problem. Well, Walter did not hold back. Walter told her everything. Walter had been used to his aunt's attitude for almost 23 years, and did not take anything she said personally. But I was having a very tough time doing that. I did not think it was okay to openly laugh, mock, or humiliate another person, then compare us to our own achievements and success. To our greatest surprise, after Grace listened to everything Walter had said, she stopped laughing and said she would take care of the wedding. And she said we did not need to push it, no 5 months or anything like that, because we could get married next month with her help and it would simply not be an issue. Well, that felt like good news to me. With everything she had said and done that day, I suspected she was not just doing it out of the old goodness, kindness of her heart. Well, when Walter heard that, see, he got up from the side of the table and gave her a big hug, but I did not, because I didn't like her one bit, so she didn't get a hug from me. She told us, well, she would take care of everything, including the wedding venue, my dress, food, drinks, the event planner, the decor, the cake, our honeymoon, everything. Everything. Well, I did feel a bit relieved, I'm not gonna lie. But then suddenly, she turned to Fiancee and asked if, well, she would love to be a part of my wedding, and Fiancee nodded. LOL. She told us that she did not have a budget for the wedding, and she did not mind spending any amount for our Hollywood standard wedding, because she loved her nephew, Walter, and she wanted him to be happy. We thanked her and returned home, but I was not very comfortable because I believe she wanted something in return. But Walter tried to calm me and tell me that it was normal for me to get mad after meeting Grace for the first time. He assured me that she was only trying to help and did not want anything in return. I listened to Walter, but I'd always wanted to buy my own wedding dress. I knew Grace was a fashionista and a lover of expensive things, but the way she spoke and acted, I didn't want her to shove her choice of a wedding gown down my throat. So I asked Walter if I could take a part of the money that we saved and buy my own wedding gown. and after a lot of, persuasion, he agreed. Though he still believed that it was unnecessary because his aunt would get me one of those best custom-made wedding dresses in the world. Without wasting time, we began to send our invitations because we had just 3 weeks and some days left for the wedding. Grace also kept to her word and booked the wedding venue, which was one of the finest and most expensive wedding venues in our city. But after 2 weeks, it was, the only thing she did out of the list of things that she mentioned, and I was beginning to get worried. I tried to talk to Walter about his aunt's sudden quietness, but he assured me that nothing was wrong, and he assured me that Grace could, take care of everything in a day, so I let it go. Just as I suspected that something was wrong, 2 days after, approximately a week and 5 days before our wedding, Grace calls us up and said she had changed her mind about a couple things, and said she could only continue to fund our wedding if we agreed to all the things she'd say. And Walter said we would, even without hearing what her conditions were. What's up, everybody? Mr. Reddito here. Today's story is one of those wild rides. It looks like we have some sort of bridezilla, but this time it's not the bride. If you guys are new to the channel, it supports me immensely if you click that subscribe button. Only about 6% of viewers are subscribed to the channel, so go ahead and click that button. Don't miss any future stories. Let's jump into update number 1. Grace says she wants her fat daughter, Fiancee, to be the finest and most outstanding person. The center of attention. She wants her to be right there at my wedding, and she claimed that she was doing that because Fiancee became upset after we left her house the other day. She said Fiancee would not eat or speak to her unless she looked beautiful and stood out at my wedding. I knew she was emotionally trying to manipulate Walter, but none of that was working on me. I could not just imagine Fiancee looking more beautiful than me on my big day. It was utterly ridiculous. I told Walter I was not going to accept that, but he said it wasn't a big deal. That the wedding would be about us and no one would even notice Fiancee because I'd be wearing my beautiful dress. Also, I would have preferred that we do our wedding on our own terms. And if we had known that Grace had these plans under her sleeves the whole time, I would not have agreed to be her sponsor. And we could not cancel the wedding plans too, because the wedding cards have been sent out and the venue was already booked. So, this left us in a very tight spot, and in the end, I accepted Grace's condition, and we called her back to let her know that we were fine with Fiancee looking prettier than me on my wedding day. Then she jokingly said something like, "After all, I'm the one paying the bills." But I pretended like I didn't hear crap. And just when I thought that was all she needed, Grace came up with another condition. She said Fiancee would be the one to pick what everybody was wearing, including me, my husband, my bridesmaid, and his groomsmen, just to ensure that nobody would look more beautiful than her on that day. It was so hilarious, because even though Fiancee wore a dress made out of diamonds, she'd still be an eyesore. She was so fat that she could barely stand up from tight chairs without assistance. She walked like she had something stuck between her legs, and the way she laughed with her mouth wide open was very disturbing. I mean, I'm not trying to be rude, but she reminded me of that annoying fat kid from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Well, after Grace listed all of the other things she wanted from us, I made up my mind to cancel the wedding, but Walter stopped me. I also think that Grace knew I was thinking of that because how I hesitated to answer. So, to make sure we did not change our minds, she told us if we canceled the wedding, that we'd be the ones to refund the money she spent on booking the wedding halls and the cake tasting that she had been doing. The funniest thing was, she never told any of us that she was doing cake testing with Fiancee. She just went to the cake shops with her daughter to taste cakes for my wedding. How annoying. At this point, she hooked us and were forced to accept her offer. When we did, She asked me to come the next day over so Fiancee and I could go shopping for a few things that we needed. Stay tuned for the next update. Update number 2, the next day. Hey guys, so I went to Gracie's mansion, and the moment I arrived, Fiancee stormed out of the living room and yelled at me for being late. I tried to explain to her that the bus I boarded almost hit a child, and the other driver was literally shaking. So, well, the passengers had to call his company and explain everything to them, and after that we had to take a different bus. But Fiancee did not listen. Her driver was already waiting outside the house for her, and she went into the back seat of the car while I was still trying to explain exactly what happened. I did not know I was not supposed to join her in the back seat, and when I tried to, she yelled at me and told me to go and sit with the driver in the front. The drive to the store was a very quiet, awkward one. And when we eventually got there, it seemed like the store owner had been informed that she was coming. They received her well and even offered her a glass of champagne while they brought out their most expensive dresses to pick from. At the end of the shopping, well, she finally picked the designer she wanted, and a fashion designer was called to take her exact measurements. Fiancee even said that she wanted her clothing to have little pink diamonds right around the neck. So, she showed them a picture of the kind of diamond she needed and paid in full. At that point, I did not need a soothsayer to tell why she acted all spoiled and like the next best thing after sliced bread. Grace had obviously over-pampered her, and she grew up to be an immature, rude adult. She also paid for the Jimmy Choo shoes that she wanted to wear, and at the end of the day, everything rolled into almost $100,000. When we were done with her shopping, we went to one of those cake shops that would be making my cake, and she made payment for everything. She and her mother had already tasted the cake, and they loved the flavor that they picked. I tried to ask her if the flavor they were going with and, well, what it was. But she said it's simply none of my business, and she just snubbed me afterwards. When she was finally done with her shopping, she told me to escort her to a thrift store so we could go and find me and my bridesmaid something to wear. It sounded like a joke, but it wasn't. We went to the thrift store down the street where they sold old wedding dresses that looked like they came from the 90s. This time around, she did not wait for anybody to bring the dress to her. She did the selection herself, and after going through the racks of wedding dresses for almost an hour, she found a dirty, brown, ugly wedding dress that looked like a prom costume, literally a prop. The moment she saw it, she removed it from the rack and tried to press it on my body. It was just horrible. The other dress that looked like they came from the 90s were better than the one she pressed against my body, which was an absolute disaster. She did not even bother asking if I liked it or not. She only said these words. This'll look perfect on you. Then she took it to the counter, and when we got to the counter, she asked if they had matching dresses that my bridesmaids could wear, and the sales lady pointed her to a section near the back. Even the sales girl was shocked to see her choice of wedding gown. I was so humiliated that I could not even join her to check for matching dresses for my bridesmaids. When she finally saw what she liked, she called my name and asked me to come and see what she had found. Obviously, I was not impressed. They looked way worse than my wedding dress, and I knew none of my girlfriends would be caught dead in them. The dresses looked too old-fashioned, and they looked like the waitresses from the 19th century. She took 4 of those dresses, and by the time the saleswoman calculated the price of the wedding gown and the dresses, they cost $82. That's right. $82 compared to the $1,000 she spent. She paid the lady $100 and asked to keep the change. Then I took the clothing, and on our way back to her house, Fiancee kept talking and laughing with Grace on the phone. She bragged about how beautiful her dresses were, and especially with the same diamonds around the neck, and then she told her she had booked a chocolate and yellow velvet cake just as she loved it. Hearing her have that conversation with her mother, it just I don't know, it ticked me off. I never loved chocolate cakes. It made me purge even as a child, and I did my best to avoid that cake flavor for my whole life. So, there's no way I would serve my guest a chocolate and yellow velvet flavored cake. As if that was not enough, she told her mother about the horrible dresses that she's gotten me and my bridesmaid. And she said something about people stopping to stare in disgust as I walked in. While they looked on in her admiration, I could hear Grace laughing in the background. When we got closer to her place, I asked the driver to drop me by the junction so I could take a bus and just go home. She asked if I did not want to show her mother the dress that we bought, but I ignored her and stepped out of the car. Unfortunately, when I got home, I met Walter at home and I vented all my anger to him. Literally everything. He did not take it personally because he knew how unbearable Fiancee could be. Instead, he apologized on her behalf, and when I told him everything that happened, he just kept on saying the wedding dress could not be that bad. But guys, literally, after I showed it to him, he went from defensive to absolutely utterly speechless. His facial expression was even worse when he saw the bridesmaid dresses. Then I told him about the cake, and he persuaded me and begged that I allowed everything just to go the way Grace wanted. It would work better for us, so we could save some money and enjoy the honeymoon that she'd be paying for. But no matter how much he begged, I could not imagine myself wearing that horrible dress on my big day, or even turning my bridesmaid into a laughingstock just because I wanted to, please Grace for sponsoring our wedding. Update number 4. So, it would not look like I was not listening to Walter. I went ahead and tried to wash the clothes, to at least make them look more appealing to the eyes, but no matter how much detergent I added to the wedding dress, it still had a dark, brown look. 2 days after my shopping with Fiancee, Walter went shopping with Fiancee for his suit and his groomsman's suit, and Fiancee was generous enough to take him to an actual suit shop. When they get there, she asked the shop owner to bring out old suits that people no longer wear. After Walter tested the one she liked, she paid for it and the remaining 4 for his groomsmen. When he came home, it was pretty obvious that he did not like what he was going to wear, but he could not say a thing about it. I teased him about the old fabric suit, but no matter what I said, he just kept quiet. Meanwhile, after washing the gown 2 times and I saw that it was hopeless, I made up my mind that I was not going to wear it. I didn't tell Walter about my plans because I knew he would not agree to them. So, I waited. And I waited for that wedding day. Fiancee also hired someone that would do my makeup, but after seeing all of the disaster that she's done, I knew it was better to go with my natural face than to look like a clown on my wedding day. Concerning the cake, I spoke to one of my best friends, who was also my bridesmaid, and she offered to do a 3-tiered layered cake for me as my wedding gift. She had also seen the dresses that Fiancee had picked out, but she had also said she'd prefer to come like a guest than be my bridesmaid. Actually, none of my bridesmaid agreed to wear that drama club costume. So I told them, don't worry about it, we'll figure it out, just pick a beautiful color and wear whatever makes you feel beautiful. They picked a sea green material and, sewed beautiful designs for themselves. I also told my close friends to come wearing their best clothing and shoes. I wanted them to absolutely humiliate and crush Fiancee and Grace, just as they tried to humiliate me. Finally, D-Day came, and after everyone had been seated in the hall, I walked out in my beautiful, elegant wedding dress that I bought with a part of our savings. Walter didn't even look surprised. He suspected that I'd pull something like this, since I suddenly became quiet after the shopping. When I walked into the hall, I scanned the room left and right for Grace and Fiancee's faces, and when I saw them, I smiled and waved. "Hey, Fiancee! Hey, Grace!" Fiancee did not even fake a smile. Her face was gradually turning red, and it was evident that she was angry. She wore her diamond dress, but it didn't seem like the attention was on her like she envisioned. After Walter and I were pronounced husband and wife, we had a little dance, and while I was dancing with my beautiful bridesmaid, Grace walked towards me with anger in her eyes, but my bridesmaid refused to let her penetrate the little circle they formed around me. Well, out of anger, Grace pushed one of the bridesmaids and she fell into the cake. Everybody gasped in surprise, and as soon as the cake fell, somebody rushed to clear the area and my beautiful 3-tier cake was brought in. It was at that point that Fiancee and Grace realized that I tricked them. I tricked them into destroying their own awful cake that nobody wanted. When Fiancee saw how everybody focused on me and not her, she cried, and she left the hall like a big old baby. And my petty friends laughed at her. Grace also followed her, practically running, and I enjoyed the rest of my party with my husband, family, and my friends. It was one of the happiest moments of my life. The next day, one of Walter's friends who was in charge of the wedding venue, Grace booked, called Walter and told us that Grace tried to cancel the payment. But he threatened to sue her if she canceled, and we both knew she was not happy, but we did not expect that range from her. In the end, she was forced to pay the balance even though she was not happy, and we obviously did not go for the honeymoon she planned. But we went to a fancy hotel in a neighboring state, and we spent 2 miraculous days there. We also made sure to cut off Grace from our lives. You see, Walter finally realized that she never loved him, ever, and she did all she did because of her own selfish interest. Thank you for listening to my story. That's all the updates I have for you. It's over.
Well, let's get to the nitty-gritty of this one. Yeah, a lot of the commenters, believe it or not, they were not blaming Grace or they were not blaming Fiancee. They were saying it's Walter's fault. He's the one related to them, and he was the one being an absolute floor mat and bringing OP in with it as well. At what point, guys, did they say, you know what? We don't want your money. You can take your 30, 40, 50, 100,000, whatever you spent on this wedding, and you can kick rocks. We're going to save up for 5 months and have our 30-man wedding that we always wanted. We don't need your help. Well, as we know from the story, that day never came. But at the end of the story, it looks like OP won. And by won, you get to wear your own dress, you get to have another cake, but at the same time, this bridezilla of a aunt was a nightmare. So guys, I just want to hear one thing from you. How would you have handled this situation if you were in OP's shoes? Drop it in the comment section down below. My name's Mr. Reddito. Welcome to the channel. I post every single day, try to cover every update of the story content that I post. And hey, if you enjoy the videos, stick around. Smash that subscribe button. I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a fantastic day. And it's cool to be kind. I'll see ya.